Though going Wolf to St. Charles, a collision just cleared out of the way. 35 minutes, downtown Chicago to 390. That crash at St. Charles has the northbound tri-state backed up a bit with a delay from the Reagan Tollway to the Ike. I-80 westbound past Larkin. There's a crash there in the left lane. Inbound Stevenson traffic slows Ashland to the Ryan. That's traffic. I'm Jim Palamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Occasional rain and drizzle this morning, otherwise cloudy and cold, high 48, overcast and 40 overnight. 42 officially at O'Hare. Next news at 7, breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy at his Sunday night Fox Town Hall. We played you some clips of that yesterday. This is an important one. This Trump being asked whether he believes China's allowance of the COVID-19 outbreak to metastasize and spread the world over. Mistake or malice was the question. Trump's response.
So I think they made a horrible mistake. And they didn't want to admit it. We wanted to go in. They didn't want us there. Even World Health wanted to go in. They were admitted, but much later, not immediately. And my opinion is they made a mistake. They tried to cover it. They tried to put it out. It's like a fire. It's really like trying to put out a fire. They couldn't put out the fire. What they really treated the world badly on, they stopped people going into China, but they didn't stop people going into the USA and all over the world. So you could fly out of Wuhan, where the primary problem was, all of the problem, essentially, also where the lab is. But you could fly out of Wuhan, and you could go to different parts of the world, but you couldn't go to Beijing, and you couldn't go to any place in China. So what's that all about? In other words, they knew they had a problem. I think they were embarrassed by the problem, very embarrassed. And, the case could be made. They said, hey, look, this is going to have a huge impact on China, and we might as well let the rest of the world.
I know that we're not allowed to talk about the origins of the virus per Bill Gates. He hasn't given us the okay that it's time for us to be able to talk about that, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Secretary of State Pompeo did over the weekend, saying that there's a significant amount of evidence that the virus came from the laboratory in Wuhan. The report yesterday was that the Five Eyes network, this is a spy alliance between UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, contradicted the theory that COVID-19 leaked from that virology lab in Wuhan. But did it really contradict? Or did it just say, we don't have any current evidence to suggest it leaked from a Chinese research laboratory, but we also haven't seen U.S. Intel's dossier on the topic? So is that misreporting, or is that accurate that there is actually a difference of opinion about what the intelligence indicates? I can't think of a better person to help us understand the answer to that question than Morgan Ortagus, who is the spokesperson for the United States Department of State. Morgan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So, good morning. So is there a contradiction? Is there a disagreement between the rest of the Five Eyes Network participants and the United States, or is it just we have intelligence that they haven't seen?
So I would just say we never talk about intelligence in the public format. And this habit of different people selectively, possibly leaking intelligence around the world is just not a game that Secretary Pompeo or I get in. That he was a former CIA director. I was in the intelligence community for a long time, and we consider this stuff sacrosanct and not something that should be discussed, because this stuff is people are selectively talking in general when this happens, not just in this case. You're not seeing a whole host of things that are going on in the background. So putting that aside, Secretary Pompeo has been very consistent when talking about this. He said that we don't know the origins of the virus. What we know is the Chinese Communist Party told us that this virus emanated from one of these wet markets. Okay, that's their theory of the case. When you talk to, and by the way, this doesn't have to be intelligence sources, just talk to any public health doctor or scientist, and they will say that we haven't seen the data. The Chinese Communist Party hasn't provided the data that would be required for a peer review to determine that it came from that lab. So there's lots of different theories that should be explored. We're not necessarily promoting one theory over the other. What we're saying is that the Chinese Communist Party still has not, to this day, has not allowed in credible doctors, credible scientists who can do the investigation that would be needed to find the origins of the virus. So I just feel all this talk of, was it here, was it there? It almost doesn't matter in a sense until China opens up their doors to allow credible doctors and scientists to come in and to verify those determinations.
But just to clarify the reporting on this reporting of a conflict between Western nations and on interpretation, let me ask another way. Is this a news report that we should place much stock in?
Listen, I spend my day as State Department spokesperson combing through the news, but when it relates to allegedly leaked classified information, I don't spend a lot of time on that because there is a incredibly robust intelligence sharing relationship between the United States and some of our allies. And that stuff is kept in the shadows where it should be.
And with respect to Wuhan, are you familiar with Bill Gertz's reporting on the topic?
Yeah, he covers the State Department.
Right. So he has written, he seems to be ahead of the learning curve on what was going down in Wuhan for many months leading up to our understanding of this viral outbreak. And his reporting seems to indicate that, and he identifies specific researchers at that virology lab by name, that they were engaged in very risky activity with respect to their research, including with coronaviruses or viruses that are bat related, and and that this is something that, while we still have questions about it, we have questions about who patient zero is, we have questions about what exactly happened. There seems to be a lot of evidence that they weren't exactly practicing best methods for maintaining safety and security of something that has this sort of viral load.
Yeah, Bill Gertz is a fantastic reporter. He's certainly been reporting on this, and I think that's a good point that you bring up. And there's other mainstream reporters like Bill who are really digging into the details. There's a lot of what we call open source evidence out there, just research papers, things that people can find. This sort of discussion about what was said in the intel community versus this community versus that community. I think you bring up a really excellent point that there's a lot of reporters that are old school reporters that are chasing this story down and doing what they can to report the facts when they find them. And so we're certainly at the State Department, we're looking at all information that we can from all sources. And we have an incredible team of doctors, of public health doctors at the State Department. One of our main doctors is a man named Doc. We call him Doc Walters, and he has been involved in this process from the very beginning, helping actually to evacuate Americans out of Wuhan. A lot of people forget because COVID-19 is so prevalent in our conscience now. Back whenever everyone was comfortably enjoying the Super Bowl and watching it, we had Foreign Service officers, American diplomats who were in Wuhan with our State Department doctors, evacuating Americans, getting them out of Wuhan. This is at the end of January, getting them off cruise ships. So at the State Department, we have been closely following this for a long time. I think Secretary Pompeo was actually the first U.S. government official to come out, and this was as early as February, where he started saying, listen, China needs to be more transparent. China needs to give us more data. And people were focused on other things probably at the time and weren't paying as close attention as they are now. But he's been very consistent on this drumbeat.
Well, Maureen, what has been the number one priority after you've brought all the Americans home? What's your number one priority now at the Department of State during this pandemic?
That's a great question. Thank you. So we're always obviously concerned first and foremost about the safety of all of our employees around the world. Similar to the military, the State Department's the other agency of the U.S. government where we have Americans posted all over the world. And by the way, our embassies are still functioning and open now. Like government agencies, many of them are having to work from home or find creative ways to provide services. Most of our routine visa services are suspended at the moment. But the main thing that we're sort of now just finishing up is an effort where we have gotten tens of thousands of Americans, over 70,000 Americans. I think we might be, I need to check the exact number, but I think we're probably around 72,000 Americans from around the world that we had to evacuate, repatriate, and bring home. This has been a 24/7 effort to get people home. Because typically, in the State Department, we have to evacuate Americans. If you think of it, normally it's like a tsunami happened or an earthquake happened or violence happened in a particular country or maybe a region. But this is something where worldwide we had to work to bring people home. So we're really at the tail end of that effort now, and now we're looking just as governors are around the country. We're looking at each individual embassy at the department, and how much longer do we need to telework? How do we can we start resuming these services? I mean, this is all the stuff that I think a lot of government agencies are going through, because that's our job, to put ourselves in harm's way to help the American people.
Getting back to China, the story out, it's a bit disturbing, and I know this isn't necessarily within your purview, but it gets to something that is. The story that Chinese-made drones are being used in 20 states to monitor the streets to enforce social distancing. And there has been some concern expressed about spying these Chinese products. And this also speaks to this issue of building out our 5G network and the resignation or termination of Brigadier General Robert Spalding, who was very concerned about China's role in that build-out, much like the UK is now expressing concerns, because they properly have concerns about China being a good faith actor, to say the least.
Yeah, so this is an excellent discussion, and something that I could talk about for a long time. So you should know, and our mandate at the State Department, obviously it's overseas. All the domestic stuff, FBI and others have the purview there. But one of the things that Secretary Pompeo has been talking about for 2 years since he became Secretary of State is Huawei. And so Huawei, for your listeners who don't know, is the 5G network that you referred to. That is the 5G is the backbone of any city, any state's infrastructure anywhere in the world that puts it in. The problem with Chinese made 5G, which is Huawei, is that that company is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. So when so we, of course, through the NDAA here in the United States, the Defense Authorization Bill, have outlawed the use of Huawei. And by the way, we talked about the fact that we did have some rural infrastructure in the United States that had Huawei in it. We are all guilty of having to take this threat more seriously, but we have been going around the world talking to our friends and allies and partners and saying, listen, you wouldn't put, during the height of the Cold War, you wouldn't have put the Soviet Union in charge of all of your country's infrastructure. Why in the world would you allow the Chinese to put in Huawei and be in control of that infrastructure? We've similarly spoken out about things like a company called Hikvision, which is I'm not super techy, but my tech people at the State Department tell me it's a company that does similar surveillance, and they actually use Hikvision in the camps in China where they have Muslims locked up. And so you heard that correctly, by the way. If your listeners don't know, this is something else that we talk about quite loudly that I don't understand why the whole world isn't up in arms. China decides to put people in camps. They call them, they call it like a re-education center. It's essentially
concentration camp. Yeah.
For their faith, right? Simply because of the fact that they're Muslim. And I often say, if we were anywhere in the world and they had 1 million Christians locked up or 1 million Jews locked up, how would the world react? And the fact that the world just gives China a pass for locking up 1 million Muslims, there's been reports during COVID-19 that some of them were starving to death. We believe strongly in religious freedom at the State Department and the ability for people to practice their faith or practice no faith if that's their decision. And so these kinds of things, when you have a 5G network that is beholden to the Communist Party, that means all of the decisions that they make have to be done. It's not an independent company. It's not AT&T.
Right. Well, no, I mean, I think that's well said. And I know this is beyond your purview, but it's a parallel. This company DJI with these drones, Senator Rick Scott from Florida tweeting out, the virus originated in communist China, and the Chinese Communist Party's lies helped spread it around the world. Now we're using drones made by a Chinese company and backed by the CCP to enforce social distancing. This is crazy! ! And Rick Scott isn't one given to exclamation points, but it deserves one here. I'm
a Florida native, so yes, we know Rick Scott.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and
accurate description.
And thankfully, the Army has ordered troops to stop using consumer drones made by DJI, this Chinese company. But I mean, it was they had gotten into 43 agencies, 22 states to help enforce social distancing rule with these drones, and it just seems like on all fronts we need to be a little bit more circumspect.
I think that's right. I think that you really hit the nail on the head. That there's always going to be these anecdotal cases like the one that you just brought up, with these drones. But more holistically, what we're asking, and again, our job is the international mandate. We're talking to our friends and allies and close partners around the world, saying, look at 5G, look at high vision, look at all of your. And I know that this debate's having in the United States as well, but look at all of the sensitive infrastructure that you use, and you have to ask yourself, am I comfortable with the Chinese Communist Party having access to all of my information if I let in Huawei or if I let in any other number of sensitive, technical products into our country?
She is Morgan Ortagus. She's the spokesperson for the United States Department of State. Morgan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. The Treasury to borrow nearly $3 trillion to cover pandemic rescue efforts. Meat packers reopening in 2 states. Mexico's inflation rate set to drop in April. Those stories next.
The stock market is tanking. Unemployment will likely reach an all-time high. Experts are saying the worst is yet to come, but what we need now is a solution. We have Colin Plume, president of Noble Gold, for some advice. What can Americans do now to prepare for a financially secure future?
It's time to invest in assets that are sure to maintain value through any economic disaster, such as gold, silver, and other precious metals. Holding shares in companies that might not be there next year doesn't make any sense to me, and the markets are made up of hundreds of companies just like this. Take a look at the Dow Jones from 25 years ago. There are less than a handful of companies that have survived the test of time, such as Kodak and Westinghouse. But the precious